Hey guys, welcome back to a brand new video. In today's video, we're going to be looking at the 2022 generic ballot vote and how it affects the midterm environment. So, before I get started with this video, I do want to apologize for not posting as much, and like I said, I thought I'd be less busy, but I am still busy, and also I totally forgot that I didn't post. I posted that video I'd been editing for a while, and I was like, awesome, I'm good, and I kind of rode that for a week, and I checked my channel again, because I'd been off YouTube for a week, and I was like, oh, I haven't posted in a week, so I'm sorry about that. I totally zoned out. My head was totally in the clouds, but the good news is I realized that before it was too late, so I'm just going to be posting this video. So this is important, and again, it was kind of a interesting week. I'm kind of mad that I forgot to post that was the week I totally zoned out, because Chris Sununu announced he wasn't running for Senate. A bunch of new maps dropped in terms of the redistricting process where we're at. Patrick Lee, he announces he will be retiring. So, it was a pretty interesting week politically that I would have liked. I would have liked to make those videos had I had the energy to do so, but unfortunately I did not. So, we're gonna be talking with this instead, and I think this is a pretty interesting topic. I'm always interested. Generic ballot polling is always kind of my favorite type of polling, just because I think it's the most interesting. That's not to say I don't like all polling, but I think generic ballot polling, I think, is not talked about enough, and I think it's something that is really important to look at. So, the first thing to remember, this is kind of a general rule of thumb that I use. In the end, the party that gets underestimated by the polls always does better. And that may sound kind of redundant, but I mean it in a very literal sense, in that if a time traveler from November 2022 came here and told me the Democrats are going to overperform congressional polling, I would take them as the Senate favorites. And if someone said that to me about the Republicans, I'd take them as the Senate favorites as well, and the House favorites, because I think the Democrats are losing the House no matter what. But I think it's that the polling misses that we see and the actual results are very correlated to a degree that I think you can actually predict elections based off of the final handicap between, or the margin between what actually happened and what the polls were saying. And that's not possible to do, mostly because you obviously, if the polls were saying D+4 and the end result was D+2, you wouldn't know that till after the election, so you can't really do that. But I think, looking back, I think it's important to note that. So, in 2014, I don't think that RCP has a 2014 generic ballot polling aggregate. I'll check right now, but I don't think that they do. I was wrong, they actually do, which is actually convenient. So, just going back to 2014, and I'm sure you can find some data for 2012 and 2010, and I know in 2010 the Republicans were underestimated, in 2012 the Democrats were actually underestimated by a lot, but in 2014, which is I think the best to start at, because it's the most recent really red wave, I would consider to be the most recent red wave, although 2022 might change that. The environment, or that the polls were forecasting, was about a GOP plus 2.4, and that's pretty solid in any election where the Republicans win the popular vote, let alone by 2.4%. I think it's very, very impressive for them. It's obviously, if the Republicans win a popular vote by any amount, I think that they're winning the House, and they're definitely Senate favorites. So it's always good for Republicans when they win the popular vote. And yeah, so they ended up winning it by about 6%, and as you can see, the polls really fluctuated between 2013 and 2014. So at this time in 2014, so what is it? It's the 15th one I'm filling, the 16th one I'm releasing. The Democrats had about a 2% lead in the generic ballot, and right now it's actually kind of what they're at right now. I mean, they're up by 0.6%, so it's a narrow lead for sure. But as you can see, after the summer, and for whatever reason, Democrats tend to usually have good summers and then blow it when September comes. The polls were showing that the last day that the Democrats had a lead in the generic ballot in 2014 was on September 2nd. September 2nd. After that, Republicans, right here in the middle of September to mid-September, totally jumped about 4% in that polling, and they, kind of held on to that lead. They rode that into Election Day, and, they were up by 2% on election day, and they ended up winning the generic ballot by 6%. So that was, 2014 was a big year for Republicans. They did really well, and the polls underestimated them. And in 2016, Republicans, I wouldn't say that they did. 2016 was not a red wave, per se, but it was certainly, I think, it was certainly a better than expected year for them, and I'll show you why. So, the GOP ended up winning the generic ballot by about a point in 2016, which, like I said, whenever the Republicans are winning the generic ballot, they're always going to be likely having control of Congress, especially in this day and age. And, they did. They won the Senate and they won the House. But the polls had them down by about a point. There was a lot of fluctuation. The Economist in YouGov, I know that they had the Democrats up by 3, and, Bloomberg and Fox had the Republicans up. So, there was clearly a lot of fluctuation here, but the Democrats ended up with about a 1-point lead, a little under that. And, that really, in the last week of the campaign was, it really, it thinned, to be completely honest here. So, and like, as you can see, on Halloween or on November 1st, Democrats had about a 3.5-point lead in the generic ballot. It totally, it evaporated, and they ended up with a 0.6% lead on election day. And and I'll say this all, when the polls are going a certain way, polls are not always going to be accurate. They're usually not close. Like, polls, half the time they totally miss. 25% of the time they're kind of close, and then the other 25% of the time they're reliable. But, if the polls are right 1 out of every 4 times, it's not great to rely on them. But either way, what you can infer from polls is if they're trending a certain way, on election day, that party is always going to have the momentum, and they're going to usually win the toss-up races. Because toss-up races are not like, odds where it's like, and like, I guess I kind of made this mistake too, because I missed 2 Senate races that I should have gotten right. The races are like if you have 4 competitive races, they're not going to go 2 and 2. Usually they break for one party because that party has the momentum on election day, and they get just enough voters to turn out for them in the competitive states. So the Republicans, they had, they weren't even winning in the generic ballot at any point really in 2016. Going back to the end of the summer in August and up till November, they were not winning, like, ever. and like, I mean that literally. There was never a point, at least in the polls, where the GOP was favored to win the generic ballot. And, they had the momentum heading into Election Day, and they ended up winning it. And, they held on to the House. They lost seats, but they held on to the House. And in a presidential election year, that's something that it's usually pretty hard for Republicans to do. And so, they held on to the House, and they won. So 2016 was a solid year for Republicans. It was not a red wave because they did not gain seats. They did not really have massive gains, but it was a better than expected year for them. And 2016 was by all means a good year to be a Republican. And I guess I'll just show you. We've all heard this same story before, but when you look at the states that were expected to be competitive, most of them broke for Trump. So Clinton did win. She did pretty well in the Sun Belt. She did win Nevada, Colorado, New Mexico, and Virginia. She also won New Hampshire and Maine. But, Trump won so many more. He won Arizona, he won Iowa, he won Michigan. He actually won Wisconsin, which was supposed to be in Clinton's camp. He won Ohio, he won Pennsylvania, he won Maine 2nd District, he won North Carolina, he won Georgia, he won Florida. So, toss-up states, one party's going to win a few, but, it's never really an even split. And, in my opinion, I don't think New Mexico and Colorado should have been considered toss-ups. They should have been lean Democrat. New Hampshire probably should have been lean Democrat, so should have Virginia. So, the only state that was a toss-up on election day that, really should have been a toss-up that went to Clinton was Nevada. And I mean that very literally, because Nevada was the only competitive state that Clinton won that the polls had her down in. That's literally it. So, yeah, I guess I'll just leave it at that for 2016. I also just want to point out the Senate map, or Democrats underperformed by a lot. They were expected to flip Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. They did not flip those seats. Arizona was supposed to be competitive. It was kind of competitive, but not really. They got, Ohio is a state that I still think about to this day, mostly because of how bad the 2016 Senate race in Ohio went for Democrats. I mean, they ran a former governor who was supposed to make it close, and they lost by 20 points, and he didn't even win, I think Ted Strickland won 2 or 3 counties out of the 66 in the state. So, Ohio was embarrassing for Democrats. They did pick off New Hampshire, and they did, they did flip Illinois, but, really, they should not have done this badly. They should have, we hear this every time, but they should have at least won Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. And since the Republicans had the momentum going into Election Day, they got, enough voters in Waukesha County in Wisconsin, and they got enough voters in Bucks/Chester/Montgomery County to break through them, Pennsylvania. So I think it's all about 2016 I want to talk about. I guess 2014 you can stress kind of how when a party gets underestimated by over 3% or over 2%, it indicates a wave, and how in 2016, the Republicans were never favored to win the generic ballot, but they had the momentum, and as a result, I think that could have been a warning sign for Democrats, and it was. Now 2018 I want to look at too, because we're going kind of in some sort of a chronological order here. Democrats, like I said, the party that usually gets underestimated usually does quite well, and they usually are going to win at least one chamber of Congress. And the Democrats, the polls are pretty solid in 2018. I know, Rasmussen had the Republicans up by 1 and they lost it by 8, but the polls still did underestimate Democrats by about a point. That doesn't mean too much, but it's just kind of shows that trend continues. So on election day, the Democrats were up by 7.3%, and it was like they won it by 8, so it was a pretty accurate forecast. It was better than most polls. But what I do think is important to look at is that 2018 was not a super I didn't have a channel back then, but I did not know as much for politics we're all still learning, and like I say this, we're all still learning, but I think I know more about politics now than I did in 2018, that's for sure. But I kind of knew that the Democrats were in for a good year because my knowledge was somewhat, it was serviceable, I guess. But I think 2018 was a year that was expected to be a Democratic wave heading into it, and it ended up being a Democratic wave. And as you can see here, the closest it really got was about a 3-point lead for Democrats heading into the summer of that year. And I think got kind of close here in August for 1 or 2 days, and then it kind of just it didn't really fluctuate as much as say 2014 did, where you had Democrats were leading 2 months before the election, then they totally changed, and Republicans gained 4 percentage points in the span of a week. Now 2020 was similar to 2018, that it was not it didn't really fluctuate too much, but the Democrats held a pretty stable lead, and they ended up getting underestimated by a lot. 2020 should have been a a really good year for Democrats. They should have had 52 or 53 seats in the Senate, maybe more. They probably should have gained in the House. They probably should have won the presidency by a lot more, and they had a very, very mediocre showing. I think that people say 2020 was a good year for Democrats because Biden won the election, but I think that's a very, very, very I don't want to say simplistic, but it's not a good way to look at it, especially considering that they were up in the polls by 7%. 2020 should have been a repeat of 2018. And if presidential election happened in 2018, Democrats would have probably won North Carolina, would have won maybe Ohio, maybe not, probably Iowa though, probably would have won Georgia probably would have lost Georgia actually, but they would have kind of traded North Carolina and Georgia, and they probably would have picked off one more Rust Belt state. And they definitely would have won Pennsylvania by a lot more. Same with Wisconsin, same with Michigan. 2020 was expected to be, by not me, but by a lot of people, a year for Democrats that was similar to 2018 because they were up by 7 in the generic ballot polling. They won by 3. House Democrats did win the popular vote nationwide. They still got more votes. But it should have been a much better year considering everything that happened that damaged the Republican Party. 2020 was a train wreck of a year for Republicans, and they still managed to come out of it as a party that had momentum. And that is something that I think is a phenomenon that I will never be able to fully understand. So Democrats up by 7 heading into Election Day, won by 3. Again, they didn't lose, so it was not a loss, but it was still a showing that I think they, still kind of scratching their heads at, because they should have won many more Senate races, many more House races than they actually did. And so for 2022, all I really want to talk about here is what's currently going on, because, this has, generic ballot polls, I think, are kind of useless until you get to the fall of the year before the election. And so, once I started paying attention, I pay attention always, but I started paying attention to generic ballot polling in kind of September, beginning of September. It was mostly because of the California recall at the time, but I started paying attention in September to these polls. And in September, Biden's approval had kind of collapsed around that time. But Democrats were up by about 3%. And, I always say their best point was kind of in April or May, and, they were up by about 5 to 6% at some points in the spring, and then it's kind of collapsed now, to be completely honest, and they're up by about 0.6. That like Democrats are at the lowest point that they've been in Biden's presidency, and that's I think you can tie that to Biden being at his lowest point in terms of approval rating. So, polling is never great. I'm not going to base my forecast off it just because of how bad it was in 2020, how bad it was in 2016. But what I will say is that if we're here, which we'll be here before we know it, unfortunately, if we're here, I will be able to, I think, make a prediction on who's going to be underestimated based on the momentum, because usually whoever has the momentum gets underestimated, because if a party is up by 6 a week before, and then the lead narrows down to 1, I can guarantee you that the other party that has narrowed it down from 6 to 1 is going to win the generic ballot, and that they're going to be underestimated as a result of that. So that's what I will say, and I think that should be the main takeaway from this video. I know I kind of rambled on and on and on, and I hope I didn't talk too fast. I feel like this is random, but I'll have little bouts of where I'll be told I talk too fast in videos, and then other videos I think my pace is just fine. So I felt like I was kind of talking fast this video. Hopefully not, though. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. And as always, thank you for watching.